I never expected her to remember my name, let alone everything else. It was a Tuesday morning, gray and soft with drizzle, the kind that makes the city feel smaller, quieter. I was halfway through my usual walk to the corner cafe, the one with chipped paint on the doorframe and the faint smell of old books drifting in from the shop next door, when I spotted her standing under the awning, fiddling with her umbrella. "Hey, Alex," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, just firm enough to cut through the drizzle. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear and glanced at the street, like she'd just noticed me for the first time that morning. I froze, because I'd never been Alex to anyone like her. To me, she was always Mrs. Kapoor, or Mom, if we were joking at my friend's expense, which we never did in public. Hi," I said, adjusting the strap of my backpack. I probably sounded nervous. I always did around her. She had that effect. She smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile that demanded attention. It was lighter, almost shy. "The usual?" she asked, nodding toward the counter. "Yeah," I said, fumbling to unzip my bag. My fingers hesitated over my notebook, then shoved it aside. She already knew my order: black coffee, 2 sugars. She had remembered last time, and the time before that. Small, almost invisible details. Tiny gestures, but they stuck in my head like they mattered more than they should. I found a seat near the window, and she came over a minute later, balancing her coffee and a paper bag with a croissant. She set it down gently, letting her fingers brush against mine just long enough for me to notice. I stared at the window, pretending to check the street outside, but I could feel her gaze lingering. "You're quiet this morning," she said. Not teasing. Observational. Like she'd caught me mid-thought. "Just tired," I muttered. I wanted to say more, about the late-night grading, the emails I didn't send, but my voice trailed off. Instead, I folded the napkin around my cup, feeling the crease dig into my palm. Small, repetitive motions. Something to ground me. She watched me, fingers tracing the rim of her cup, then looked down at her bag, like she was thinking of something else entirely. I flicked my eyes toward her hands, then back to my coffee, the warmth seeping into my fingers. I had this strange awareness, noticing everything. The slight crease near her thumb, the way her shoulders shifted when she leaned in. "Do you still see Rahul?" she asked suddenly. Her voice was casual, but my stomach tightened. Sometimes," I said, shrugging. Truth was, I didn't really know what sometimes meant anymore. Mostly, I just thought about how she had remembered to ask. Not many people cared about those details. We drank in silence after that. No one needed to fill the space with words. Outside, the rain tapped against the glass. Inside, the faint smell of pastries and coffee. Everything felt ordinary and strangely significant all at once. When she finally stood, stretching lightly, I realized I hadn't noticed how much time had passed. She paused at the door. "See you later?" I wanted to say something clever, maybe ask her to stay, but I just nodded. "Yeah, later." She smiled again and walked out into the drizzle. I watched her disappear, and my phone buzzed on the table. A new message from an unknown number. "Can I see you tonight?" I blinked, tracing the edge of the napkin with my finger, heart thudding in a quiet, peculiar way. And for the first time that morning, I didn't look out the window. This sets up. Male POV, hesitant and observant, subtle attraction through micro-behaviors, fingers brushing, folding napkin, watching her hands, quiet loneliness, unsent thoughts, paused reflections, cliffhanger with an unexpected message. It was a Thursday evening, and I found myself standing awkwardly in her kitchen, holding a dish towel like it might explain my presence. She was stirring tea in her small, chipped kettle, humming softly, a tune I couldn't place but somehow recognized. "Careful, it gets hot," she said, handing me a cup. Her fingers lingered on the rim just a fraction too long. I noticed. I sipped the tea, too hot, and tried not to think about how quiet the apartment felt when it was just us. There was the faint smell of lavender in the air, or maybe it was the soap she always used. It didn't matter. I was aware of every detail. "Rahul used to bring his little chess set here," she said suddenly, setting down the kettle. "We'd play while he waited for his mom to pick him up." Her eyes flicked toward the counter, like a memory she didn't want to fully voice. "Chess, huh?" I said, careful to sound casual, though my throat was dry. I never learned. She smiled, the kind of smile that tilts slightly, almost apologetic. I guess not everyone's good at keeping track of pieces. I laughed quietly, but the sound felt awkward in the silence that followed. I wanted to ask her about Rahul, about her life, about why I suddenly cared so much about these little memories, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I imagined her curled up with a book I'd left behind, her hands folding the same napkin over and over, wondering why I hadn't texted, why I hadn't called, why. We moved to the small table by the window, tea in hand. I noticed the condensation on her cup, the faint tremor of her fingers. I wanted to reach out, but didn't. Divorced long? I asked, because something about the quiet made honesty feel possible. 10 years, she said softly. Feels like a lifetime ago. Her gaze drifted to the street, then back at me. Funny how some things don't change. Some things just linger. I nodded, unsure how to respond. I thought about the risks, the age difference, the unspoken connection to Rahul, the very real social lines we were skirting, and yet, sitting there, all of that seemed distant. Her presence filled the apartment in a way that made my own apartment feel like a hollow room. The kettle whistled, and I went to pour more tea. Our hands brushed briefly, just a flick, but it made me aware of how alive my body felt in the presence of hers. She didn't pull back. She didn't move forward. She just let the moment exist. I don't know why that moment stayed with me. I thought as I watched her wrap her fingers around her cup. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. She glanced up at me and let out a quiet chuckle. "You're staring," she said, teasing but soft, like a gentle reprimand. I looked away, embarrassed. She smiled again, and in that small, fleeting gesture, I felt something unnameable. Connection, warmth, caution, longing, all tangled up in one brief touch of her gaze. It was a risk and a comfort at the same time. And I stayed there, holding my cup, pretending to warm my hands while my chest burned quietly. White heavy checkmark key elements implemented. Small personal truth. Her divorce status. Memory of Rahul playing chess forbidden/risky connection implied. Age gap. Her being a mother figure to his friend internal conflict and imagined scenarios emotional tension via tea. Kitchen tasks. Shared silences gesture with emotional weight. Brief hand/finger touch. Soft gaze. Subtle humor Friday evening. And the apartment smelled faintly of rain and warm bread from the bakery downstairs. She was bent over the counter, chopping vegetables for dinner. I leaned against the doorway, pretending to scroll through my phone, but really just watching the way her shoulders moved, the way her hair caught the light from the window. "You sure you don't want to help?" she asked without looking up. No, I'm okay," I mumbled, twisting my fingers around the strap of my backpack. I wanted to step closer, to brush her hair out of her face, but something held me back. She hummed and continued chopping. The knife made a steady rhythm, punctuated by the occasional soft thud as a carrot hit the board. My chest throbbed in the quiet, a slow, persistent pulse. I thought about touching her hand as she reached for a spice jar. Thought about saying something that would make her look at me differently, but the words caught in my throat. Just then, the door creaked. "Rahul, my friend." "Hey," he said, dropping his bag by the door. "Didn't think you'd be here tonight." I froze, and she stiffened slightly. Not a lot, just enough for me to notice. Her hand lingered on the counter a second too long, like she was hesitating over whether to move closer or pull back. Just grabbing some ingredients," she said smoothly, smiling in that quiet way that could disarm anyone. Rahul chatted on, oblivious, and I kept my head down, fidgeting with the hem of my shirt. I could feel the tension coil inside me. Every glance at her made it worse. Every near touch now impossible. When he left 20 minutes later, the apartment felt smaller, tighter. The air between us thickened. I moved to clear a small stack of plates, and she passed behind me, her arm brushing mine. I jerked slightly, not out of surprise, but out of everything I wasn't allowed to feel. She hummed again, soft and low, a sound that might have been nothing to anyone else, but to me, it was almost unbearable. Almost. I should probably. I started, then stopped. Words always failed me with her. She turned, just slightly, And for a heartbeat, our eyes met. Something hung there. Not a kiss, not even a touch, but something that could have become more if I'd dared to move, if she had dared to let it. I swallowed. She looked away, her lips twitching as if she wanted to say something, anything, and didn't. And just like that, the moment dissolved, leaving only the faint smell of vegetables and the quiet pulse of my own anticipation. I went to the window, staring at the rain streaking the glass. My reflection was faint, shadowed, but I could still see the tight line of my jaw, the way my hands itched to reach for her. She stood in the kitchen, silent, stirring something. Waiting? Not waiting? I couldn't tell. I didn't move. And somehow, that made the tension worse. White heavy checkmark, key elements implemented. Emotional resistance. Hesitation, pulled back body language complications. Rahul walking in. Ordinary routines disrupted rising tension. Intimate beats, near touches, silent longing almost crossed line. Near eye contact. Internal urge for a kiss, fragments and unfinished thoughts in male POV Saturday afternoon. The park was nearly empty, except for a few joggers and a woman walking her dog. I trailed a few steps behind her, hands shoved in my jacket pockets, feeling the chill seep in through the fabric. She hummed softly, kicking at a fallen leaf, and I realized I'd been holding my breath without knowing it. "Do you ever get tired of being careful all the time?" I asked, voice low. Too low, maybe. She glanced at me, eyes narrowing slightly, not in annoyance, but like she was weighing whether to answer. Her fingers gripped the strap of her bag a little too tightly. "I don't know," she said finally. "I guess you get used to it. Always thinking ahead, worrying, holding back." I stayed quiet, my gaze fixed on the cracked path beneath our feet. But inside, something was raw and tense, like an exposed nerve. I imagined her laughing at something Rahul had said earlier, imagined her looking at someone else, and my chest tightened with a sharp pang I didn't want to name. "You ever think about things you shouldn't?" I asked, trailing off. My fingers itched to reach out, touch her shoulder, anything to anchor myself. Her eyes met mine, steady, calm, and then flicked away. "Sometimes," she admitted, quiet. A pause, a deep breath. "But then I think about what's right, and She stopped mid-sentence, letting the words hang. I wanted to press her to finish. I wanted to tell her that I didn't care about what was right, that I only cared about this, the quiet moment, the way her hand brushed her hair back, the subtle tilt of her head when she looked at me. The wind rustled through the trees, dragging a shiver down my spine. I imagined reaching for her hand, holding it, and the thought alone made my stomach flip. But I stayed put, frozen, because she hadn't moved toward me. And maybe she wouldn't. We sat down on a weathered bench, not side by side, but close enough that our elbows nearly touched. She poured the rest of her tea into the tiny cup she always carried, and I realized I'd been staring at her hands the whole walk. Small gestures, folding the cup, twisting the lid, brushing an invisible crumb off her jacket, were now impossible to ignore. I began. My voice cracked a little. "I don't know if I should, or if I'm imagining things." She looked at me then, really looked, and for a moment, the air between us was heavier than rain clouds. Something vulnerable hovered there, something that could break. My heart thudded in that quiet way that made every breath feel deliberate, necessary. And then she smiled, just a little, and I realized I didn't know what she was thinking. Would she let me cross that line? Or would she step back, leaving me here, with all these words unsaid, all this tension unclaimed? I didn't ask. I didn't move. But I wanted to. White heavy checkmark, key elements implemented. Emotional breaking point. Jealousy, fear, suppressed desire, quiet. Ordinary setting. Park. Bench. Post-tea walk near confession and raw internal honesty, pauses. Unfinished sentences. Internal struggle scene ends just before irreversible action. Kiss or full confession. With unspoken question hanging Monday morning, and I was already at the cafe before she arrived. The rain had stopped, but the streets were still slick, reflecting the muted city lights. I stirred my coffee slowly, watching the door, expecting her smile, her nod, her soft, "Hey, Alex." She didn't come. Not that morning. Not that evening. Not the next day. Texts I drafted sat unsent, frozen in my drafts folder, because what could I even say? Where were you? Did I do something wrong? Then, Friday, she appeared, carrying a box of papers. Her expression clipped, polite, and something in me recoiled. Gone was the quiet warmth, replaced by measured movements, brief nods, no hums, no soft glance. She set her coffee down in silence and began sorting her papers like she was protecting a fragile secret. I wanted to ask. I wanted to touch her arm, say something, anything, but my voice felt small, swallowed by the apartment's hush. Finally, she muttered, almost to herself, "I should have told you sooner." I leaned in slightly. "Told me what?" She didn't answer right away. Her fingers trembled just enough to catch my attention, then steadied. About him. About Rahul. About everything I left unsaid. I blinked. That twist, the reminder of her child, the reality of the boundaries I'd been tiptoeing around, hit me with quiet force. Not anger. Not heartbreak. Just pause. My stomach turned over, but my head spun in slow circles. I didn't know, I managed. "No one did," she said, voice flat, carrying weight I couldn't unpack. She sipped her coffee, gaze fixed somewhere behind me. Behind the apartment walls, behind the ordinary street outside. Somewhere unreachable. I wanted to ask if she'd been avoiding me on purpose. If she'd pulled away because she needed space. If she even wanted me around at all. But my questions felt selfish. Wrong. So I didn't ask. The next days passed with half-seen glances in the hallway, a brief hello at the mailbox, and nothing more. The apartment felt emptier than before. I drafted messages on my phone that I couldn't send. Notes with no punctuation, words strung together like a net I was too afraid to throw. I imagined her at the cafe without me, laughing softly with someone else, stirring tea in the same careful way, I searching for someone I wasn't. And yet, when I saw her walking past my window, carrying her thermos like always, I felt no anger, no sadness, just the sharp, quiet ache of everything paused. One evening, I opened my phone to type one last message. "Can we talk?" And then I didn't send it. The cursor blinked on the empty draft, the screen glow mirrored in my tired eyes. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence. White heavy checkmark key elements implemented. Twist, she pulls away, reveals emotional baggage, Rahul, unsaid boundaries, male POV internal conflict, hope, confusion, withdrawal ordinary but emotionally loaded actions, coffee, papers, hallway glances ambiguous ending, message unsent, unresolved tension. It was late afternoon when I found her in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. The same routine as before, but something had shifted. The air felt heavier, quieter. My footsteps on the tiles echoed, though I wasn't sure if she noticed. "I came by," I said, voice low, almost tentative. She looked up, startled for a fraction of a second, then nodded. No words, just a tilt of her head. I realized that saying more might ruin the fragile balance between us. Or maybe it already had. I leaned against the counter, hands pressed flat, feeling the cool surface under my palms. I didn't send that message, I admitted finally, glancing at my phone on the table. I wasn't sure if I should, or if I should have just stayed quiet. She didn't respond immediately. She finished slicing the last carrot, then dropped the knife into the sink with a soft clink. Her eyes met mine. Steady, quiet, open. "I wondered," she said after a pause, "if you'd even want to see me again." The words weren't dramatic, not shouted or demanded, just released, hanging in the small space between us. My stomach clenched. Every instinct told me to say something, anything, but I stayed still. "I do," I whispered, almost to myself. "I want to." I didn't know how. Her lips curved slightly, not a full smile, just a soft acknowledgement. I wanted to reach out, brush a stray hair from her face, but the moment didn't need embellishment. It was in the quiet, the stillness, the recognition of each other's presence. She set the teacup down, fingers lingering over the rim. "I didn't want to risk it either," she said. Pause. Breath. "But I don't regret seeing you." We stood like that, two people suspended in hesitation, in longing, in careful consideration of what might come next. The vegetables, the knife, the faint scent of lavender soap, all ordinary objects, but charged with attention neither of us tried to fill with words. Finally, I did the smallest thing I could. I moved my hand toward hers. She let me. Our fingers brushed lightly, then rested together on the counter. That touch wasn't a kiss, or a declaration, or a promise. It was acknowledgement. Recognition. Okay, she said softly, letting her hand stay. Her eyes flicked to mine, then down at our joined fingers. I nodded, letting the silence settle around us. No grand statements. No confessions of love. Just presence. And somehow, that felt more than enough. White heavy checkmark key elements implemented. Emotional climax. Quiet choice to engage instead of retreat intimate setting. Kitchen vulnerability and emotional cost shown through gestures and pauses suppressed words finally spoken. Simply and honestly human connection. Subtle touch. Soft okay. Acknowledgement weeks had passed. Rain had come and gone. The cafe still smelled faintly of coffee and old books. The clock still ticked a little too loud, and I still arrived at 8:47 a.m., though now with a quiet anticipation instead of a restless pulse. She moved through her apartment in the mornings like she always had, pouring tea into her chipped cup, humming lowly, the same faint lavender scent trailing after her. Only now, I felt like I belonged in that small orbit of routines, like my presence was expected, wanted, not a question or an intrusion. We kept the small rituals, the kitchen, the bench in the park, shared coffees that sometimes went cold because we forgot them while talking about nothing and everything at once. There were no declarations of love, no dramatic confessions. Just moments. A brush of fingers across a folded napkin, a soft laugh when she caught me staring, a quick nod when I silently offered to take the heavier bag. I noticed the details now, deliberately. How her hair fell over her shoulder when she poured coffee, the slight crease near her thumb when she held her cup, the way she tucked her scarf differently each day. I carried those images quietly, like small treasures. One evening, we sat on the same bench where I'd first let myself feel exposed, watching the city glow through misted glass and dripping leaves. She sipped her tea, I sipped my black coffee, and the silence between us was warm, comfortable. Nothing urgent, nothing paused. I like this, I said finally. Not a question, just a statement. She glanced at me, eyes soft. Yeah, she said. Then a pause. Me too. The words hung in the air, simple, understated, but more than enough. No fireworks, no grand gestures, just a shared acknowledgement of presence. Life continued its ordinary flow. I returned to the bookstore after work. She managed her building, checked on tenants, laughed at something small and dry that made me almost fall over from surprise. We kept our connection tucked into quiet moments. A thermos left on the counter, a message sent late at night, a hand briefly brushing against mine when we passed each other. And in all those pieces, the subtle, earned closeness, I realized something I hadn't admitted to myself before. Peace doesn't roar. It waits, patient. It grows in ordinary gestures, in the warmth of being seen without demand. That morning, as I packed my bag to leave for work, I saw her fold the napkin around her cup, exactly like she had the first day I noticed. My chest tightened softly, in the way only certain memories and certain people can make it. And I thought, quietly, to myself, I'd stay in these small, quiet moments forever.